September 18th, 2024, 2 days after a deadly attack via pagers in Lebanon against Hezbollah, 20 have been killed using amateur radios. At least that's the reporting from the Associated Press. 20 people and some 450 additionally wounded after a concerted effort of multiple radios exploding at roughly the same time. Specifically, an Icom ICV82. Responding to the news, Icom Japan released a statement stating that from 2004 to 2014 was the sale of the ICV82. It has since been discontinued for some 10 years. They made an additional statement that was pretty interesting. The production of the batteries needed to operate the main unit has also been discontinued. I have a feeling that batteries are going to come up more as people discuss this further. So where did these radios come from? Were they antique radios or used radios purchased off of the used market? Well, no, probably not. I was able to find the ICV82 on AliExpress. You can see it here for $42.45, and it looks to be almost a complete copy of the original Icom V82. Another note from Icom is that all of the radios followed ISO 9001, 14001, and 27001, and so no other parts than those specified by our company are used in a product, an overarching statement for the entirety of Icom's manufacture. Something about this particular news story makes me think that going on X.com is going to be one of the faster ways to find some of the details. You can see an exploded radio here, and what looks like an explosion from the interior outward, or wherever that pressure was applied, caused some kind of an inward tearing of that metal case. You're looking at the back of the radio in this example. Immediate note should be made that no Icom radios are exploding, particularly all the ones that are currently for sale. So if you have an Icom radio, you shouldn't be worried about that being a problem for any of you. A couple of key important notes with this attack was that a lot of the explosions were timed and seemed to be in a wide enough area that not a single transmitter would have been able to set off the lot of the radios that exploded, considering the amount of casualties you had, both dead and wounded. So here's where we will vacate the factual zone and enter what I would call the speculation land. I find it interesting that these radios likely were not using a traditional RF sensing of the radio itself. Yes, the ICV82 has an accessory kind of compartment at the base of the radio hidden behind a little shield attached via 2 screws. What I think has likely happened here, and what anonymously I have been tipped off to possibly being the crux of the issue, and possibly why also Icom mentions batteries in their posting, is that the battery itself was manipulated by whoever carried out this attack. So say half of the battery contains regular battery parts, and then the remainder has a timer type of device and an explosive charge. And while speculation is abound on what type of explosive was used, how they ignited it, I do find that many times it is mentioned that the tetraethyl tetranitrate, or PTN, was used in some kind of a liquid mixture filled into the spaces of the radio and allowed to harden. After doing a bit of Wikipedia foo, I was educated in this PETN explosive that only a few grams of it would be lethal to a human, at least in the point of maiming, if not killing. And if you consider the battery compartment on a radio the size of an ICV82, it's possible that much larger quantities could be added and still have a triggering and detonator mechanism allowing the explosion to go off. Something to keep in mind is that these radios could have been deployed for multiple days, if not weeks, months in some cases. We don't know all of the information. By modifying the battery to be where the explosive charge and detonation source came from, you'd allow the radio to be fully functioning in that at least part of the battery was maintained for the radio's effective use. This gives you the ability to just swapping out a battery, sending the radio on its way to whatever its intended purpose was, and then having some kind of a timed result, timed in such a factor that they all exploded at the same time. After the initial news started to break, a number of amateur radio operators in the community were discussing things like potential radio-controlled IED-type trigger devices using the radios themselves that were involved in the Beirut explosions. This quickly, though, seemed like not the way that this went, because these devices, when rigged and configured for detonation of an IED, are pretty much only capable of functioning in that role. Any DTMF tone or something that breaks the CTCSS subaudible tone for squelch would ignite the explosion, whatever was attached to it. It would seem that the radios used by Hezbollah were actually functioning radios that they were able to use to communicate. In this case, there was something additional that was probably added to the radio, either in part of the battery or held under the accessory port that is in the body of the Icom ICV82. Note again, I'm using the word Icom, but I mean whatever counterfeit or potential radio was actually in use. And I believe one or more of the pins of that accessory port likely contain DC power that could be used to set off an explosive. At the end of the day, we don't know much about these cloned Icom radios or whatever they ended up being the origin. We do know a lot more about the pagers at this point, but fundamentally, we don't know what caused the explosions, the depth of technology that was in them, the makeup of the material of the explosion, although there's some many good ideas out there. And I will leave you with some radio stuff. Many people asked why in particular Hezbollah was even using these radios, whether cloned or real Icom radios or not. The ICV82 was a robust radio when sold, operating in the very high frequency VHF range. They also had a U82 version, which ran on ultra high frequency UHF. They would have been perfectly useful for in close communications. They were relatively rugged and had a shock resistance rating. As more information comes out about this, I will post more information. Otherwise, I do have a cloned radio coming from AliExpress, and I also purchased some used ICV82s that I'd like to take a look at and see what the actual differences are. I'm Josh, KI6NAZ. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment below and give me a thumbs up. Thanks so much, and 73.